Hi everyone, happy Advent. This is another episode of Cultivate, and we have a special treat today. We have all the Evergreen regional staff together with us here at New Beginnings Church, Community Church, and we're really glad to spend this time with you. And I thought we'd change things up a little bit. I know a lot of our churches right now are very busy. They're getting busier as Christmas approaches, but I don't know if you know this, the regional work gets quieter and quieter because frankly, they're too busy to talk to us. But this got me thinking a bit, maybe for some of our viewers, what we do at the region, the pacing, the culture, the approach is very different. So I was wondering, like, how do you folks feel it's been different? That was the first thing that I noticed when I came on board was our timing, like, of the intensity of work. Like Advent gets quiet, Lent gets quiet. What were some of the things that you folks saw that, is different as being in the region?
So we don't have the liturgical seasons that we're following here. My pace ramps up and down based on how close we are to an event. So right before the leadership retreat, I'm going hard as I can. Right before, one of our, the Taste of Evergreen event, I'm busy. Right before the annual meeting, right? Those are my busiest times, the times where I've got a whole bunch of things to do and we're working with churches and all the other stuff that makes the region go, processing the checks, making sure that all gets entered. That's all still there too. So it's less liturgical seasons and more based around what have we got coming up next? And then we see smaller spikes with like denominational events like the biennial or Space for Grace, things like that.
Right, it's a lot more like project-based, not necessarily like calendar-based.
Absolutely.
Right, okay, yeah. How about for you folks? What do you feel like is one of the differences that you found compared to like working the local church and being in the region?
For me, local churches, the pace tends to be somewhat predictable. So since a lot of our local churches do sort of do things by the calendar, when Christmas is coming, when Advent is coming, when Easter is coming, and so on and so forth. So those things you can see. My job mostly works on feedback. And I am happy to note that when I put out a call for churches that are doing a food ministry, a number of churches responded. Thank you, by the way. And I had more churches respond as far as that was concerned than any other time of the year, which is fantastic. And it's a great reminder that a lot of our churches are focused on working with their community. Yeah. And food ministry is part of that. So to me, that is the biggest change, to see something like that.
Yeah, that's a good point, because when I was like local church pastoring, Sunday's always coming. Doesn't matter what you're doing during the week, no matter what pops up, you have that rhythm. It's like Sunday will always be coming. But we don't have that steady rhythm in the regional work. Like there's sometimes where it gets really busy, where it doesn't. And for those of you who are new to Evergreen, Paul here, you're focused on operations and administration. Siobhan's doing social media. And Doug is, of course, our executive minister. I help with innovation and design. But yeah, Doug, it was, you've had a long tenure with pastoral work. Yeah. So when you switched to being an executive minister, what did you feel like was the big shift for you?
It became very unpredictable. Right. There was less, there's always, when you're in church, in local church ministry, there's always the unpredictability of illnesses and problems and concerns and things like that. But there's a rhythm, like you said. There's a Sunday comes every week. The calendar year has its own rhythm in the church. What I noticed coming into executive minister is that it shifted a lot from that rhythm into two main areas, right? The first is that they're responding to crises and supporting when trouble comes, which is most unpredictable and random. But the second one was that it turned into a lot of inward thinking, a lot of not necessarily envisioning. There is envisioning in it, but also thinking about how to support different spaces at different times in their different development areas. which makes it a very interesting thing, because a good bunch of my work is sitting around looking into space, just sort of working through possibilities and how would I react to this? How would I react to that? Or this group is in this stage, that group is in that stage. How do they relate? How can I support, those things? So it's a very interesting space in that. That is a constant. Yeah. There's always a constant, and then there's the unpredictability of difficulty.
Right.
Yeah.
And I feel like, especially Evergreen, because our churches are so diverse, like in size, cultural context. Like there is no one blanket way to approach all the churches, right? There's no one fixed approach. And I think, to Evergreen's credit, I think that is actually what's kind of unique about us, is that we really don't ever think that there's one solution. Like we really customize everything to each context, each solution. And that does require more work. It does make it more unpredictable because we don't have like one fixed like solution for everything. And I imagine you being the executive minister, people don't usually come to you just, hey, Doug, just saying hi. But actually we get more of that probably than other regions, I feel. We do get that sometimes. But, we do. But usually if they're reaching out to us, like it's a pretty unusual or extreme case. So like we just don't know what's gonna be in that email or in that phone call or that Zoom call. Were there any like surprise joys that you had? Like, I know this is my first job ever doing like denominational work. I didn't know it was on the other side, but was there anything that, when you got into this, you're like, oh, didn't know that this would be a nice thing to have? Like,
I think for me, one of the joys that I found in this work is that I get to enter so many of those different contexts and relate to so many different kinds of congregations.
yeah.
When you're in local church ministry, you have your context and your congregation. Right. And while change does come, it comes slowly. But I'm very often having to think about what is the context that I'm working with someone with, whether that's the resources that a congregation has, the number of staff members, their culture. How do I approach this unique situation? And for me, that's the kind of stuff that keeps me excited and going. The same thing day after day bores me, which, when I was talking to Doug and applying for the job, he said, you won't have to worry about that in regional ministry. So,
right.
So even when I have a quieter month and I do all of the usual things, process the checks, send out emails, those kinds of things, there's always something that comes up or some new twist on an old problem that I get to address. And that keeps me excited and it, looking forward to how do I help the churches? How do I continue to make Evergreen the best that it can be? Yeah.
Actually, that is sort of similar in like pastoral work, like, because I found like all of us, there's always this moment like, oh, I guess I'm doing this. Like, I guess I'm learning how to like program a website or some kind of like random skill. Like, so you're always like learning something new. You're always doing something different. There's never one prescribed path. I feel like regional work. You have to be very nimble, like very like, okay, let's figure this out, for sure. How about you folks? What did you feel like was a surprise for you?
A surprising joy for me was that we have this cultural perception that diversity doesn't work really well in intimacy, right? That diversity works well in bigger spaces, stadium, when you're watching something together, but not necessarily intimacy. And what joy for me was to see how Evergreen is a system and a culture that is built in the assumption that not only diversity works, but is essential for the functioning of the space. And I love that, because we're saying in essence that it is possible to have unity and to have a culture and belonging without necessarily having to become homogeneous. Like, you don't have to be assimilated into something in order to be part of this community and to feel part of this community. So that was a really good surprise for me, because it also showed me that in other spaces that is not the case.
That is really interesting thing about Evergreen, is that I feel like even though we are, quote, an organization, it feels very uninstitutionalized, It feels much more like connected through relationships. I was, just as you were talking, I had a great conversation with Pastor Eric at our Christmas dinner last night. And we just had he was just telling me about Costa Rica and Nicaragua and like his just connections with both places, and there was no feeling of like we're roles here, like he's reporting, but it just felt very natural, like. And I was just sharing like, oh, that's interesting. When I work with the Burma churches, they actually have a parallel that's very similar to what you went through. Or when I was in Japan, I learned about this. But it felt very like free and intimate. But also, I really felt both of our worlds were really expanding, and that was a very special moment. Siobhan, what do you feel like? Because like you're serving not just one church, right, with social media, but you're helping like a lot of churches. And was there any kind of surprises that you had in this kind of role that you have?
So I am a storyteller at heart. I've been, writing short stories pretty much since I learned how to write. And that sort of translates over into social media because now I get to do it visually and, in other ways, just digitally. So the churches that I'm serving, each one has their own story. They have a lot of similarities, but there's always that one little thing that's a little bit different. One of the things that I'm doing now is I'm working with a group at New Life to help tell the stories of kids from Myanmar and Burma and their immigration stories and how their faith plays into that. And each one is a little bit different. So it's really fascinating to, first of all, just as far as churches are concerned, hear how a church wants to tell its story and how I can help them. And two, hearing individual stories within these churches that are different from what the churches have to say. So it's really fascinating and it really teaches you more. You cannot have any sort of closed-mindedness when you are doing this job because it will be dismissed the moment you start exploring those stories. Right. So
that's a good point, because like I remember when I was like local church pastoring, like, and I was the only staff, like you just feel so stretched, like just trying to keep this thing running from week to week. Like things like telling your story, like getting your story out there, it just feels like really hard to do on your own. So having someone like you come in and like help give me the bandwidth to tell the story is so important. And we have so many good stories in Evergreen, and it's not like people don't want to talk about it, but they just need some help getting their story out.
And I think also that we want to tell those stories and other people want to hear them because that's how they know that these churches exist. And that's how they know they have a connection with those churches. Otherwise, we're just another building.
Yeah. I think that's well said. So, just before I close up our conversations, I just wanted to maybe kind of go around and just listen to you all. As the year is coming to a close, Advent is sort of the season of like celebrating the birth of hope. I wonder, going into 26, are there some aspirations or hopes for you in Evergreen for our family churches? And I want to say this because what I find really interesting about Evergreen is that we're never like static. We're not like, okay, we're good. This is what we do. We're done. We'll just keep doing what we do. But I love how we keep asking the questions to move us forward. We still have, we have the curiosities that move us forward all the time. So I was just wondering, like, is there a curiosity, a hope, or an aspiration that you have, or even an exploration, that you have for this coming year?
One of the things that I'm actually really looking forward to this coming year is the upcoming leadership retreat in February, 5th through the 7th.
Nice.
And but this will be the first time that we'll be sort of opening a new cycle, right? So 2 years ago, we had a listening leadership retreat where the churches were able to bring the things that they were excited about, the things that they were struggling with, the places that they wanted to grow in. And then we were able to be responsive to that. It helped shape our themes and the resources that we provided, the experts that we brought in. And so this coming leadership retreat, we're going to do that again, right? And I'm excited because we're not working under the assumption that the answers that we were given 2 years ago are still the answers.
Yeah.
They might be, and if so, great. We already have some of those resources and so on lined up.
Yeah.
But new things have probably come up, right? We have new churches that have joined us. We've had 7 churches join us in the last 2 years, with more on the horizon. More communities are becoming part of us, and that necessarily helps Evergreen grow into who we are supposed to be, right? Their diversity, their wisdom, their joy that they bring to us makes us better. But it also means that they come in with their own unique struggles, concerns, hopes, dreams, and we really have a chance to listen to that and respond to that.
Yeah.
And so for me, that's what I'm really looking forward to is to hear what are those things that are on the hearts and minds of our churches, of the people in our churches, and then being able to then figure out how we're going to support that, support where they're looking to go.
I would say I want to keep telling stories. And in particular, the stories of the kids that I was just talking about have really reminded me that mostly what we see in churches are the adults and the older folks. And we kind of include kids sort of maybe perhaps, but they're going to be the future of our churches. So we need to make sure that their voices are heard. And I want those stories, more of those stories, to be paramount, because each child is going to have a different point of view about their faith, and that's okay. They're still growing and they're still learning. So I want to make sure that they have room to grow, room to learn, and that adults start to understand what they're going through so that they can meet them halfway there.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think one of the things I'm looking forward to is Evergreen has experienced considerable growth in the past few years, and I'm looking forward to welcoming that diversity and working with them into the culture we have, which is we're not us because we're against something else, or we're not us because we're not something else. You know, we're not in opposition to anything. Our community is not built in a response to something or in an opposition to something else. And I think that's very unique. You know, generally we tend to, especially in our current climate, that we tend to think that belonging has to be against something else. Or you are something because you're not something else. What I like is that we continue to build and nurture this space here where we say we are because we are, not because we're not something else. We're not against anything. That is, injustice and hurting people intentionally and discrimination, yeah, of course. But what I'm looking forward to is helping us nurture that into the new spaces that have joined us. To say, here's how we see the world.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because I feel like being reactive energy doesn't last long, because it's very usually emotional, right? But if you're built on like a lasting value or a principle, right, and then you're moving in a more positive sense, like you're talking about, it's a lot more easy to sustain that, isn't it? Yeah. And I feel like what we're doing at Evergreen outlasts like a temporary crisis, We're going to be doing this regardless of what comes, right? Mm-hmm. If we have aliens, next year or something, I don't know. That'll be another podcast episode we'll talk about. And that is an exciting thing about Evergreen, because we're not trying to just pinpoint, a trendy topic and then react to it or try and stay relevant. Like, I feel like it's always a losing game like that. But we can be ahead of it if we stay true to this thing. And interestingly, we are in that approach. I do feel like we are actually ahead of the curve in a lot of our approaches to certain things, because we chose not to, just throw up our arms in reaction all the time, So it'll be interesting how that plays out. I think for me, I'm really excited about this work that we did last year about this well-being for pastors. And the takeaway that we got was like, yeah, you can be very well as an individual, but what if you're a healthy individual, but you're in a toxic environment? And so I'm looking into more ideas, thinking about how can we help, healthy ministry leaders, healthy pastors, but also how can we help their environments, their systems be healthy too? So if we get both of those, I think we might be onto something. So we have some ideas about that. Another episode. And what's exciting, in the year to come, we're going to have more episodes, hopefully a little more regularly. And we're excited to have you folks along for the ride. Thank you for those who've been supporting us, listening to this, subscribing to this. Please tell people about it. But these podcasts are also a great way to learn about who Evergreen is. If you've got questions, you're curious, this is a great place to start. So thanks for joining us in Cultivate, and have a blessed Christmas, a wonderful Advent. We're excited to see you in the new year. So take care.